The urgency instinct makes us want to take immediate action in the face of a perceived imminent danger. It must have served us humans well in the distant past. If we thought there might be a lion in the grass, it wasn't sensible to do too much analysis. Those who stopped and carefully analysed the probabilities are not our ancestors. We are the offspring of those who decided and acted quickly with insufficient information. Today, now that we've eliminated most immediate dangers and are left with more complex and often more abstract problems, the urgency instinct can lead us astray when it comes to understanding the world around us. It makes us stressed, blocks us from thinking analytically, and encourages us to take drastic actions that we haven't thought through. We don't seem to have a similar instinct to act when faced with risks that are far off in the future. In fact, in the face of future risks, we can be pretty slothful. That's why so few people save enough for their retirement. This attitude to future risk is a big problem for activists who are working on long timescales. How can they wake us up? How can they galvanize us into action? Very often, it's by convincing us that an uncertain future risk is actually a sure immediate one, an important problem that must be tackled now or never. This drains credibility and trust from their cause. Their constant alarms make us numb to real urgency. The activists who try to make things seem more urgent than they are boys crying wolf. And we remember how that story ends, with a field full of dead sheep. We need to create fear. That's what Al Gore said to me at the start of our first conversation about how to teach climate change. It was 2009 and we were backstage at a conference in Los Angeles. He wanted me to show the worst case future impact of a continued increase in CO2 emissions. I had a profound respect at that time for Al Gore's achievements in explaining and acting on climate change, and still do. The vast majority of people know very well what drastic change the climate experts are foreseeing. That high level of awareness is in no small part down to Al Gore. So is the enormous achievement of the 2015 Paris Agreement on reduction of climate change. He was a hero to me. I agreed with him completely that swift action on climate change was needed, and I was excited at the thought of collaborating with him. But I couldn't agree to what he asked. I don't like fear. Fear plus urgency makes for stupid, drastic decisions with unpredictable side effects. Climate change is too important for that. It needs systematic analysis, incremental actions, and careful evaluation. And I don't like exaggeration. Exaggeration undermines the credibility of well-founded data. In this case, data showing that climate change is real, that it's largely caused by greenhouse gases from human activities such as burning fossil fuels, and that taking swift and broad action now would be cheaper than waiting until costly climate change has happened. I insisted that I would never show the worst case line without showing the probable and the best case lines as well. Al Gore's words echoed around my head long after that first conversation. To be absolutely clear, I'm deeply concerned about climate change because I'm convinced it's real as Ebola was in 2014. I understand the temptation to raise support by picking the worst projections and denying the huge uncertainties in the numbers. But those who care about climate change should stop scaring people with unlikely scenarios. It's time to solve the problem by taking action. Action driven by data and cool-headed analysis. So, what's the solution? Well, it's easy. Anyone emitting lots of greenhouse gas must stop doing it as soon as possible. And we know who that is. It's the richest countries on income level 4 who have by far the highest levels of CO2 emissions. So let's get on with it. And to be serious about this change, we need data to track our progress. Looking for the data after my conversation with Al Gore, I was surprised how little there was. Thanks to great satellite images, we can track the North Pole ice cap on a daily basis. This removes any doubt that it's shrinking from year to year at a worrying speed. So we have good indications of the symptoms of global warming. But when I look for the data to track the cause of the problem, CO2 emissions, I found surprisingly little. The GDP per capita growth of countries on level 4 was being carefully tracked with new official numbers released on a quarterly or monthly basis. But CO2 emissions data was being published only once every 2 years. So I started provoking the Swedish government to do better. In 2009, I started to lobby for a quarterly publication of greenhouse gas data. If we cared about it, why weren't we measuring it? I'm very proud that since 2014, Sweden now tracks quarterly greenhouse gas emissions, the first and still the only country to do so. This is factfulness in action. Sometimes the most productive action you can take is to improve the data. I'm not an optimist painting the world in pink. I don't get calm by looking away from problems. I don't deny that there are pressing global risks we need to address. The 5 that concern me most are these: a global pandemic, financial collapse, a third world war, environmental deterioration, and lastly, the risk that extreme poverty continues. Why do they concern me the most? Because they're quite likely to happen. The first 3 have all happened before, and the last, extreme poverty, is happening now. And because each has the potential to cause mass suffering by pausing human progress for many years or decades. The first 4 risks are highly probable scenarios that would bring unknown levels of future suffering. But extreme poverty isn't really a risk. It's a reality. It's misery, day to day, right now. It's also where Ebola comes from, because there are no health services. It's where civil wars start, because people desperate for food and work with nothing to lose tend to be more willing to join guerrilla movements. And it's a vicious circle. Poverty leads to civil war, and civil war leads to poverty. Because the civil conflicts in Afghanistan and Central Africa mean that all other sustainability projects in those places have to be halted. Terrorists hide in the few remaining areas of extreme poverty. When rhinos are stuck in the middle of a civil war, it's much more difficult to save them. Today, a period of relative world peace has enabled a growing global prosperity. A smaller proportion of people than ever before are stuck in extreme poverty. But there are still 1 billion people left who are suffering right now. And we know the solutions: peace, schooling, universal basic healthcare, electricity, clean water, toilets, contraceptives, and microcredits to get market forces started. There's no innovation needed to end poverty. It's all about walking the last mile with what's worked everywhere else. And we know the quicker we act, the smaller the problem. Because as long as people remain in extreme poverty, they keep having larger families and their numbers keep increasing. Providing these necessities of a decent life quickly to the final billion is a clear, fact-based priority. I want to end with a story about a woman whose fact-based arguments saved my life. It was 1989, and I was in a remote and extremely poor village called Makanga in what's now the Democratic Republic of Congo. I was part of a team investigating an epidemic of the incurable paralytic disease called Konzo that we suspected was related to the village's poor diet, which included cassava root. The research project had been 2 years in the planning and everything had been meticulously prepared. But I had made one serious mistake. I had not explained properly to the villagers what I wanted to do and why. I wanted to take samples of their food and their blood and urine, and I should have been with the head of the village when he explained that to them. That morning, a crowd of maybe 50 people, all upset and angry, appeared. Some of them were pointing their fingers at me. 2 men raised muscled arms and waved their big machete knives. "What's the problem?" I asked the teacher, my translator. "They're saying that you are selling the blood. You are cheating us, and then you're going to make something with the blood that will hurt us." This was very bad. I asked him to translate, and I started to explain that we were working on a disease called Konzo. I had photos from Mozambique and Tanzania where I had studied Konzo before, which I showed them. They were very interested in the photos. "We think it's linked to how you eat the cassava root," I said. No, they said. "Well, we want to do this research to test whether we're right. If we can find out, maybe you won't get the disease anymore." People began to mumble. One of the machete men started screaming again. And then a barefoot woman, perhaps 50 years old, stepped out of the crowd. She strode towards me, then turned, threw out her arms, and in a loud voice said, "Can't you hear that it makes sense what he's saying? Shut up! This blood test is necessary. Don't you remember everyone who died from measles? Then they came and gave the children the vaccine, remember? And now no child ever dies of that disease, okay?" The crowd shouted back, unmollified, "Yes, the measles vaccine was good, but now they want to take our blood." The woman paused, then took a step towards the crowd. "How do you think they discovered the measles vaccine? They do what this doctor calls," and she looked at me, "research. This is how they find out how to cure diseases. Don't you see?" We were in the deepest, remotest part of Bandundu, and here this woman had stepped up like the secretary of the Academy of Science and defended scientific research. Her dramatic talent was amazing, but she didn't use it to distort the facts. She used it to explain them. Forcefully, in a manner I had seen confident African women act in villages many times before, she rolled up her left sleeve. She turned her back on the crowd and looked me in the eyes. "Here, doctor, take my blood." The men with machetes lowered their arms and moved away. 5 or 6 others wandered off, grumbling. Everyone else lined up behind the woman to give their blood. I have always been extremely thankful for the insight of this courageous and intelligent woman. She stood up and spoke out. It had nothing to do with formal education. She most certainly had never left Bandundu, and I'm sure she was illiterate. But she had courage. And she was able to think critically and express herself with razor-sharp logic and perfect rhetoric at a moment of extreme tension. Her factfulness saved my life.